Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Digital Bridges to Freedom, Connecting History and Technology. As Elvis said, I am Kyla Williams-Tate, Digital Equity Director in the Office of the President, and I will serve as your storytelling guide for today's roundtable discussion. This session is part of Cook County's Racial Equity Week under the theme Racial Equity in Action, Honoring the Past, Shaping the Future. I want to take a moment to thank President Pretwinkle and the Cook County Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion team, Michael, Elvis, Kelsey, and Max, whose leadership and commitment make this week and today's conversation possible. Today, we are here to explore how history, technology, and equity converge in a project that's both a tribute and a tool, a way of remembering the Underground Railroad while building digital literacy for the future. The Underground Railroad was a movement built by freedom seekers themselves. It was an intricate web of routes, safe houses, and strategies carried out with allies who chose resistance. Many of us learned about the Underground Railroad and Harriet Tubman, and her courage is certainly legendary. But there were countless others, enslaved and free, whose resilience, planning, and bravery made liberation possible. To ground us in that history and the courage that it demanded, because it certainly took a lot of courage, let's watch a short video narrated by author, poet, and scholar Clint Smith.
So, we've established that the Underground Railroad wasn't an actual railroad. But it's also important to know that even the metaphorical railroad wasn't a centrally organized endeavor. There were no headquarters, no comprehensive maps, no Underground Railroad magazine. Many people who we now view as part of the Underground Railroad across the country didn't actually know anything about one another. The Underground Railroad was made of individuals and small networks of people working together amid the larger, less centralized operation. And while the Underground Railroad wasn't a literal train, they did often use the language of train infrastructure. The various stops and safe houses could be known as stations. The guides who led the escapees to different stations were conductors, and the folks who hid escaped slaves in their homes might be known as station masters. Harriet Tubman, among the most famous conductors, used this sort of language herself, saying in 1896, quote, "I was the conductor of the Underground Railroad for 8 years, and I can say what most conductors can't say. I never ran my train off the track, and I never lost a passenger." It's unclear where the term Underground Railroad first originated, but it's said to have first appeared in an 1839 newspaper. Frederick Douglass alludes to it in his 1845 autobiography, where he expresses frustration at the abolitionists who have been talking about the network with such a lack of discretion that he says is turning the operation into an upper ground railroad. See, Douglass thought that this might compromise the entire operation. He wanted it to be something more covert, more underground. Sometimes, when people tell the story of the Underground Railroad, what they imagine, and what some early scholars depicted in their own work, was a network made primarily of benevolent white abolitionists who helped escape slaves who couldn't help themselves. And while there were many white abolitionists who were absolutely involved in the system, sometimes this story can lead to many people ignoring or erasing the fact that it was mostly black people who were part of and who led the Underground Railroad's efforts. What's more, there were also differences in the consequences and implications of their work if they were caught. Many white abolitionists would face fines or public shame, depending on the community in which they were operating. But for most black abolitionists and escapees, everything was on the line. They could be returned to slavery, tortured, or even killed.
So as we reflect on that framing, again, Clint did it way better than me. I want to bring it closer to home. Cook County was not only a crossroads of commerce, it was a crossroads of courage. Our region holds multiple verified Underground Railroad sites, and several other historical markers and stories. We will honor some of that history briefly via a few pictures in this PowerPoint presentation. And let's see if we can get that going.
Fingers crossed.
All right. I saw something that looked familiar, so I think that's mine. While we're waiting for that to come up, did you know that September is International Underground Railroad Month, named in honor of Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman, who both made, or in Harriet's case, first attempted, their escapes this month. Harriet's first try was with her two brothers, but they argued about which way to go, got spooked, and dragged right back to the slave quarters. Later, she did escape on her own, going the right way, and on one of her many return trips, she came back for those same brothers. Now, when I read this story, it reminded me of my two brothers. They don't never listen. I be telling them all the right ways to go, and they're like, no, 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 it's this way. So Harriet knew the way, but then in her first attempt, she was convinced to go another way, and that didn't work out for her on that trip, but it did work out subsequently for many, many, many trips, as she was one of our more well-known conductors on the Underground Railroad. So Illinois, next slide please, has 34 verified Underground Railroad sites recognized by the National Park Service Network to Freedom. Now, when I was on that website this week, I saw some really disturbing news. It said that the website, which is part of the National Park Service, will no longer be updated. So where does all of those stories go? Where does all of those historical markers go? Is this a product of our federal government and their dismantling and addressing and deprioritizing these kind of initiatives? It saddened me, and that's why this work that we're doing and this story that we're telling today is super important. So let's go to a couple of the sites in Cook County, some that you may be familiar with and maybe some you'll learn. Next slide. This is Ton Farm, established in 1853 along the Little Calumet River. It was a critical Underground Railroad station where neighbors aided freedom seekers, and in 2019, next slide, it was added to the National Park Service Network to Freedom. And as you can see here, some of our electives are celebrating the national marker that was put in place at Ton Farm. Next slide. The African American Heritage Trail along the Little Calumet River, it flows through the Cook County Forest Preserves. The Little Calumet River guided an estimate up to 4,500 freedom seekers into the Chicago's suburbs, south suburbs, now commemorated by the African American Heritage Water Trail beginning at Beaubien Woods. And one of our guests today does a lovely tour along that trail. Next slide, please. The 10-Mile Freedom House. It was once a farmhouse refuge in Maywood for both farmers and freedom seekers. The 10-Mile Freedom House was demolished in 1927 and is now marked by a McDonald's monument. So they built a McDonald's on top of the marker. But there is a monument there that has the broken shackles honoring Harriet Tubman and the Underground Railroad, and that's in Maywood. Next slide, please. The Quinn Chapel AME Church is Chicago's first African-American congregation. It was a vital Underground Railroad station. After the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, the church formed a vigilance committee to guard against bounty hunters. So the church members was out on the lookout, and they would do their little signal, hoo-dee-hoo, to let you know that somebody was in the neighborhood. You know, it was like the first version of the neighborhood watch, if you want my opinion. Next slide. And then we have the Graceland Cemetery in Chicago. Founded in 1860, excuse me, it holds the graves of abolitionists, conductors, and freedom seekers, including John and Mary Jones from Chicago, Emma Jane Gordon Atkinson, who was believed to be one of the big four, and there was 4 women running stuff at the Quinn Chapel on that vigilance committee. And then Philo and Ann Carper, who sheltered, an estimated 200 fugitives, and Elsie Payne Freer, who chased slave catchers on horseback. So there was some folks who really were putting this moment and this movement into action, and we honor them, and they are honored at the Graceland Cemetery in Chicago. And that brings us to this table, right? And we'll have some resources that we'll share again at the end of this presentation. At this table, we have some of the best, some of the most rooted in this work, and has like really good perspective on storytelling and technology and history. And they are the project team for the Underground Railroad Virtual Museum, a tool to curate and protect local stories while encouraging confidence and digital skills with AR, VR technology, AR, augmented reality, VR, virtual reality technology. To note, this project is a Boost Grant recipient of the Cook County Digital Equity Impact Small Grants Program, which provides funding and storytelling support to local nonprofits, local media, and libraries. These grants help expand internet access, boost digital literacy, and amplify community voices to drive lasting change. With that spirit, it is my honor to welcome our roundtable participants. I'm going to start from this end, and interestingly enough, y'all are lined up how y'all are on my paper. That's good work here. So here, to my far left, is Rodney Harrington. He is the Executive Director at the River Oaks Community Education and Development Corporation, or ROC ED for short. He is also the newly elected President of the Midwest Underground Railroad Network. Next to him is Dr. Larry A. McClellan, Emeritus Professor of Sociology and Community Studies at Governor State University and founder of the Little Calumet River Underground Railroad Project. And then next to him is Mama Edie McLeod Armstrong, bilingual storyteller, percussionist, and all things beautiful and bright on this panel, for sure.
Yes.
And then to my current left, closer left, immediate left, thank you, Edward Prentice III. He is the CEO of the Yep Nation, Inc., and is primarily responsible for the technology on this project. So now, before we dive into these thematic dialogues, I'd like to invite each of you to briefly share how your work connects to freedom, storytelling, and technology. And we will start with you, Rodney.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing us to present this to the county. We are very pleased to have this opportunity. Again, my name is Rodney Harrington. This has been a very, I think, uplifting project in those particular categories that you talked about. Freedom. What does freedom mean when it comes to digital inclusion and digital equity and technology? Our children, which is what my organization focuses on, have an opportunity to learn more about this incredible history that sits right in their backyard. Our organization is located in South Holland, which is the far south suburbs. Most of the children and really most of the residents out there are very unaware of this history. So to be able to bring this history to them represents a level of freedom and an acknowledgement of that particular history, and that they can access it at any time. We want to make it available to them through this particular technology, as well as creating the type of educational opportunities that we can to allow them to learn and grow. So from that standpoint, there's a freedom in that. Now, as we go forward, we're going to learn more about how this technology can be utilized to advance our communities locally, as well as economically impact our communities through travel and tourism. So we are hoping that this particular conversation leads toward a better understanding of those particular vehicles in which we are hoping to deliver this project through.
Thanks, Rodney. Dr. McClellan.
Again, I'm also delighted to be with you and to look directly at the history. We've looked in the last few minutes at different kind of elements, but let me do a really quick historical piece to kind of give you the frame, and it's out of this that the stories arise. When looking at the Underground Railroad, there are two great cycles of stories. There's a great cycle of stories of those people that escaped their enslavement in the South and made their way into the northern states. And there's a great cycle of stories about the people that responded to them, which we call, excuse me, which we call the Underground Railroad. Now, the great dilemma we have in Cook County and Illinois and across the country is that we have a lot of these Underground Railroad stories, and we need to be developing and telling more and more of the freedom seeker stories. Because in point of fact, the Underground Railroad was all over the country, not just, God bless Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass, they were on the East Coast. Mm-hmm. And we have in the Midwest a remarkable set of stories about people that were escaping their enslavement, and part of what we've got to do is be telling those stories. Research suggests now that at least 4,500 people escaping their enslavement came into the state of Illinois, and at least 2,000 of those made their way into Cook County. And most were headed for Chicago, but they touched on a variety of other communities. And this movement of freedom seekers, these journeys of people on the way to freedom, saw Chicago as a sanctuary city, but also understood that you really had to get to Detroit so you could get to Canada, get across the river in Detroit to freedom in Canada. The great irony was that, and freedom seekers deeply understood this, that the only way to be free was to leave the land of the free. They had to move. Now, we have folks that all over Cook County, a great diversity of folks that responded to freedom seekers. An awful lot in Chicago, but also the Little Calumet River and Calumet City, Park Forest, Indian Head Park, Maywood, and other kinds of places. So this really is very much a Cook County story. Now, as we do this, we have to reframe the story because so much has been told about the Underground Railroad networks and so much has been missed about the stories of the freedom seekers. And what happens is that we end up with what is essentially a white story. It's talking predominantly about white abolitionists that were assisting freedom seekers, and that's a very incomplete part of the story. What we need to do is understand that freedom seekers coming into Illinois, coming into Cook County, as they needed some kind of assistance, directions, a place to stay, maybe some food or whatever, they asked for help. And people responded to them. And it was those people that were responding that become the networks of the Underground Railroad. But obviously, we've got to be talking about the travelers as well as the responders. And that's part of what we have to reframe. In addition, you'll notice I've said a couple times freedom seekers. In the 19th century language, freedom seekers are, the 19th century language used the expression fugitive slave. And that's the one that's in our history books. And there's the horrendous Fugitive Slave Act. However, that is a category of property. When we do research, we are looking not at population records, we're looking at property records. And you find the list of the cows and the sheep and the pigs and the slaves. What we have chosen to do over the last 30 years is recognize people as freedom seekers to understand their fundamental human intention. That is, they wanted to be free human beings, and they were going to do whatever was necessary to get to their freedom. So we need to reframe that and understand the critical role, the agency of freedom seekers on their way to freedom, and then secondly, understand the diversity of the response. particularly in Chicago, in the 1840s and 50s, the leadership for the Underground Railroad, responding to freedom, was in the hands of black families. And they worked very closely with white families. But by 1850, 1855, as people were coming out of their enslavement, they were being responded to by black families. And that's, again, not part of our traditional history. And that's why we need to reframe it. Now,
Dr. McCullen, I don't mean to interrupt you, but we save it for the questions. I need you to save all this good history
Okay.
for the questions. Let's move on to Mama Edie and let her do her
Okay,
introduction.
okay.
Thank you.
Good morning, and am I on? And thank you. I also thank you for inviting us to participate here today. So good to see folks who showed up in person as well. This is a very, very special project for me, for obvious reasons. Of course, it won't necessarily be special for other people who are also obviously of African descent for the same reasons or at all. And a lot of that has to do with what we have not learned about ourselves as children of African descent and as children of those African descendants who had been enslaved. And in addition to being a storyteller, I'm also a speech and language pathologist. And one of the things that became very clear to me, very, very clear to me as I was doing therapy was what my children did not know about themselves as children of African descent. And I remember even growing up, I was raised in Catholic schools, from kindergarten through senior year of high school. You know, those nice big framed photographs and images of great people who did great things hanging up on the walls of schools and halls and what have you. I never, from kindergarten through senior year of high school, I never once saw a picture, a framed picture of a person who looked anything like me hanging up on the walls. What does that say to children who are looking at what is supposed to be a gallery of greatness? Does that say, well, I guess my people must not have done anything special? So how do you get that information? How do you get that knowledge when you're also faced with the fact that many people who had been enslaved and remembering, and then I remember when it hit me that slavery just wasn't really that long ago, when it really hit me that way. And when I thought about the fact that my grandfather, who I ended up writing a story poem about, my grandfather was born in 1890. Emancipation wasn't until 1863. So, I mean, he wasn't born that far outside of that time period. And so there's a psycho-emotional effect in terms of timing relative to how we see that period, and therefore how we connect with it, or if we connect with it at all. Sometimes if we see a situation that seems so far removed in time or so distant, wars are fought so far away, so many miles away, it's like, what does that have to do with me? And this is where part of the disconnect happens with children who are studying history in school. It's what happened with me. When I was a kid in school, I couldn't stand history. I thought it was boring. I was like, why do I have to learn about all these dead presidents and all these wars? What does it have to do with me? And so I know that identity plays a part in our sense of worthiness. If we feel good about ourselves, if we recognize who we are, if we recognize and appreciate the culture from which we come, then there's more of a tendency to feel worthy of something human and humane, and there's more of a tendency to want to fight for it, to demand that we have that right to pursue it. There was just this little quick story about when I was doing speech therapy in the Chicago public schools. During this particular time period, I was working with children who mostly had severe learning disabilities, or they were at least labeled that way. So I got to the point where I would go to the classrooms sometimes, like if one of my students who had individual therapy was absent that day, I'd go into the classroom and say, oh, you want me to work with all your kids? Well, of course, the teachers are going to say, yeah, sure, come on in. So this particular day, so the other teachers wanted it too. This particular day, I go to this classroom and I ask the teacher, so are you ready for your classroom session? She said, Armstrong, girl, come on in here. She said, I've been trying to teach these children about the Revolutionary War. And she said, they don't get anything. I'm like, well, they got learning disabilities, number one. You got to be a little patient. And she said that she was trying to prepare them for the Constitution test that they had to pass to graduate, right? And I said, go sit down somewhere and let me see what I can do. So she went on and sat down, and so I said, well, so you all are trying to learn about the Revolutionary War? And they were like, yes. I said, well, somebody tell me the name of one country that was involved in that war. And so first there was a pause, and then somebody raised their hands, and I said, yes. And so they said, Chicago. I said, oh, we in trouble now. So what happened on the spot, I said, okay, just giving you a little bit of it. I said, okay. I pulled down the map, first of all, showed them England and the United States and what have you, and I talked about George. Well, you know the king's name was George. Now, they called him George III, and that was because his daddy's name was George, and his daddy before him, his name was George, too. So then they learned that part within this telling of this story, and George was taxing the people. He kept making the new Americans, is what I called them, send him money. And they said, well, wait a minute, we're not getting nothing for our money. We're not sending him no more money. And so George said, you better send me my money. And the new Americans said, we're not sending you nothing. And George said, if you don't send me my money, I'm sending my red coats over there at you. So then I explained what the red coats were. George said, send your boys on over here. That's okay. So I said, the new Americans and the indigenous people, they were hiding and they had their weapons. And then there was a guy who was riding on his horse, got over close to the water, and he saw a ship coming, and he knew it was a British ship. And he said, oh, my goodness, they're coming. So he went riding on his horse, and he was calling, the British are coming, the British are coming. That was Paul Revere. And so they ran and got everybody. The people came out, and they fought this Revolutionary War. The people were upset because they didn't have somebody to speak for them in England, and that was called taxation without representation. And so there were ways through storytelling that we could teach a history and that we could write stories about ourselves, about our people in our own cultures that would help us to see our natural beauty, our power, and the blessings and the gifts that we are to the world. And that's what encourages us to know that we have a right to fight for freedom.
Thank you, Mama Edie.
Appreciate it.
Edward.
All right. I think I can talk pretty loud. I always say I used to leave the third off. My name is kind of cumbersome, but I got a 22-year-old. He's Edward Prentice the fourth. So he tells me to say my name, and I'm 64, so I say I might be around for the fifth. So if you get married, no question, if it's a son, it's the fifth. Not it's Ralph or anything like that. My organization is YEP Nation. YEP stands for Youth Empowerment Program now. The young lady told me that. And basically, it's an organization where we train young women how to develop, now with all this AI and digital technology. And you all know the attack on DEI. Women have always been suppressed in the technology field. Now they're really suppressed in the technology field. So my organization, we're training them how to use all these AI tools to develop programs. And the background on me, I'll get this right. When I was younger, there was a point in time I was sleeping in my car. I didn't have anything. And there was a young lady that I befriended, and I tried to make sure she got on the right path. And I couldn't because I didn't have anything. So about 2 or 3 years after that, I found out she was murdered. And that cut a hole in my heart that I couldn't help at that particular time. And I'm a pretty spiritual guy. So the Lord enabled me to build a multi-million-dollar company doing work for BP, Baxter, not Advocate, Aon, all of those companies without a business plan. So he got me there, and then once I got to that point, I said, now I got something. So then I wound that company down to form this organization. So, and I had to start it from scratch because you couldn't do both. Everybody said, well, Ed, you got this big company, why don't you start a not-for-profit to take care of that hole in your eye? I said, no, I got to do this myself. So now, one of the big things with our youth nowadays, and you all probably see it, they're on
Yep.
screens.
Yep.
If you go to any of the top 10 gaming sites, pick one. Any one, I can't even remember the names. The top 10 are what? They're violent video games. If you get the top 10 records, what? Violent records or hip hop, degrading women a lot of times. So part of the mission that I have, we're taking all this heavy technology and we're gonna reach the kids on their phones. That's the problem. If you got this much and that's all they do, that's what they're learning. And I used to be chairman of Concerned Christian Men, and three young men, when we were working with them, they told me, they said, Ed, that's all we got is negative stuff. They say if there was some positive things out here, we would go to it. So I'm blessed to have met this organization, because now we can take all of this technology and put it on the phone. Actually, Mr. Harrington, he had his phone. He was showing me right on his phone. That's exactly what I wanted. He's able to bring up this virtual platform, and we're using the same gaming technology that is in capturing our kids now, turning them this way. And I truly believe the Lord enabled me to get to this point to where we're using all this technology. And I'm not a Bible thumper, but I do show by example. So as this starts to move out, people will see that this is something that can affect our youth. And I have three components, and then I'm going to close out. We want to have positive video games, positive music, and positive video. And as you ask me questions, I'll explain how we're doing that. Thank you.
Thank you, Edward, and thank you, all of you, for sharing such beautiful and rich stories. We had already talked when we met to plan this panel that we could be here for 7 hours, but we only have 90 minutes, so we're going to try to be really respectful of everyone's time. So thank you all for the reflections. What I hear across your stories were threads around freedom and history and storytelling and survival and technology as a tool, but also a pathway to equity, which brings us to our first thematic pillar, honoring the past and storytelling as resistance. And in this section, we're going to talk with Dr. McClellan and Mama Edie. So, Dr. McClellan, what makes Cook County's, and you've already gotten into this a little bit, but what makes Cook County's Underground Railroad history distinctive? And why is it important that communities reclaim and tell this story today?
Well, that's a huge question, but a couple pieces of that. Number one, why the Cook County story is very important is because it is a prime example across the country where the Underground Railroad involved, of course, freedom seekers were of African descent, escaping their brutal enslavement, but in Chicago, as I indicated briefly, by the 1840s, the leadership for the Underground Railroad was in the hands of black families. And those black families worked together with those white families, and this is a very powerful story that needs to be told because, unfortunately, the common history we all carry is that the Underground Railroad was something that white abolitionists did. And we really have to understand, number one, that's not the case, but number two, Cook County is a terrific example of very intense involvement by black families in this. And another piece of why Cook County's story is so important is because it reflects significant biracial collaboration. That we know that throughout the 40s and 50s, white families in Chicago and all over northeastern Illinois were very much involved with the black families that were providing leadership, and these people knew each other. Deep friendships developed, and I really think that this should be seen as Chicago's and Cook County's first great civil rights movement, is that there were people out of very diverse situations that were working together, and we need to honor it for that. And I've got some other things, but I'll stop there.
Thank you, Dr. McClellan. And I definitely agree with you. I think we focus so much on the negative portions of a lot of these stories that we ignore the opportunity to show that there were great relationships and that there were folks who were friends and working both behind and in front to ensure freedom, to ensure democracy, to ensure access to education, and even in this modern time, access to technology. So thank you for sharing that. Mama Edie, from your perspective as a storyteller, how does the oral tradition serve as a form of resistance and cultural survival? You started talking a little bit about that earlier.
Mm-hmm. That's a big one. Also, I would say that the oral tradition is an example of resistance because it's the insistence that our stories be told. It's so interesting how the civil rights movement, even if we say that, if we consider it starting back then, which I certainly agree with, that would fall into that category, right on up until today, we had to fight for the right to learn to read. Then we were able to, it was legal for us to read. Then we wanted to go to school. Then, they didn't want to fund schools and get them established. And then now we're at a place, so there was, censorship many years ago. Now we're back to censorship again. So we finally got these wonderful stories. And it's a very sad thing that stories of truth are seen as a threat to anyone. I feel that if people are confident within themselves and within their capability and their intelligence and their resourcefulness, they really shouldn't be afraid of somebody else's success, however one chooses to define it. And we know that the laws against reading were put in place in the first place in order to disempower people, to keep people from having access to the knowledge that they need. And now we're in a place in 2025 when it's being attempted to be taken away again. So as long as those of us who recognize the power and potential of our stories, like my grandfather's story. My grandfather was a member of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. In the story poem that I wrote about him, it tells you not only about Grandpa, but it tells you history about the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters and its significance as being the first African-American union, that was accepted and that kind of thing, and about A. Philip Randolph. So you get all these bits and pieces, and if you're sharing this information with people who didn't know, it's like, okay, we did have something going on. And so we have too many people who don't know just how vast a contribution that we've made to the world. So as long as we continue telling these stories, that is resistance, the insistence to tell them.
Absolutely, and agree. And for those of us who are out working in communities and doing kind of outreach and community engagement work, we make a lot of flyers, we make a lot of social media posts, but nothing moves faster than that, voice, sharing person to person, for sure. My grandmother would say, if you live long enough, you will see it.
Ashe. That's
Amen.
right.
And then she says, and if you're really blessed, you'll see it again.
Well,
So stories are certainly a way for us to be able to denote and to document,
yes,
because some of those stories are the same story,
that's
right?
That's right.
So we're going to move, thank you for sharing. We're going to move on to our second thematic theme, which is shaping the present, building digital skills through history. And that's going to be with Rodney and Edward. So my question to Rodney, how does ROC ED's project show that this learning about history can also be a pathway into building digital skills?
So one of the things that we hope to do through this technology is to, again, reach our youth, and Edward would agree with this, reach our youth and allow them to take this technology and use it for their purposes. We've created curriculum around this particular topic for the children to investigate, with the help of Dr. McClellan, investigate, observe, and ultimately come to conclusions about what this history means to not only the larger society, but to them themselves. So we are hoping that we can really dive into utilizing this particular vehicle to accelerate those types of learning opportunities for our youth. Again, I think it's important that we present it in a way that they understand it, that it's not foreign to them. So allowing them to participate within this particular realm, and again, providing the curriculum for them to learn, often I think will lead toward a more inquisitive mind for our children. And that's all we want. We want them to be inquisitive, and we want them to use the tools, that cell phone that we were just talking about, to ultimately be that sort of that vehicle, again, to move them in the direction that we hope that they take. So that's what I have for that.
Agreed. I think that we have to have an entree onto technology. Now, I work in the digital equity space, so I love technology. I'm a geek. I like discovering things. But like the TikTok, I don't know nothing about that. It's scary. Like, I don't understand it. Like, how are you dancing and the music is playing at the same time? Like, there's just a lot of technology, and because it evolves very fastly, that even the skills that you had yesteryear are outdated when the new technology comes. So if you already are 4 generations behind on technology, it's really a tough path to get going. So these pathways into digital skills is so important. And that brings me to you, Edward. What skills do people gain when they use AR, VR, or gamification for storytelling? And how do those skills prepare them for opportunities in the future workforce? And by future workforce, it doesn't have to be just young folk. You could be midlife or, on the senior side of things and changing your workforce, trajectory. So I would love to hear your response.
Sure. First of all, let's go over AR and VR right quick. AR, that's augmented reality. That's, of course, if you all remember Pokemon, where you can point your phone and something pop up on your screen. VR basically is virtual reality. And what's going on now, most people associate virtual reality with the goggles. The only thing the goggles give you is the 360 view. That's it. What we're delivering to ROC ED is virtual reality. It's a building, you can walk through it, so you're virtually walking in a space. The only thing virtual reality does is it makes a virtual representation of you and a virtual representation of the environment that you're doing the training in. And one thing about, and actually you brought it up, a lot of adults aren't into this technology, but the kids are. I've got 5-year-olds showing me what to do. And it's the problem is this pendulum is way over here with negative. Everything's negative. Shooting games and all kind of stuff. And nobody is trying to get it over here. Why? Because there's no money in it. There's no money in good. So I think that's my role. So what we're putting together, a platform that we can train anybody, what to do. You know, for the kids, like he has it on his phone, it's a game that they're used to seeing. If you just try and show them a PowerPoint, that's a snoozer for them. But if you show them where they can walk their character in and watch Mama Edie on the screen and then go over here and go out there where the pigs and stuff are at it, that's what they learn. We're launching the whole thing for junior achievement. If you all know junior achievement, they have people come into the class. They couldn't connect with K through 5. The K through 5, like, who's that guy? So we got this whole virtual platform. They're going on there selecting animals, but they're learning all the different career clusters. Wow. So to wrap this up, technology can be used as a bad tool or a good tool. Unfortunately, the bad tool developers are full blast out here. So somebody's got to answer that. And I think having this, and one thing I do want to say, I'll compartmentalize it. A lot of young people don't realize what happened to get to where they're at. They take their current life for granted. And I saw that when I was chairman of Concerned Christian Men. They don't get it. They don't get what people had to do back then for them to get to where they're at, and they're just blowing their lives away. The internet is the most powerful training platform on the planet. You can learn how to do anything with that. But just like she said, they're spending their time on TikTok. They can learn how to program TikTok on their phone if they use some of that time. I'll say this right quick. My grandmother told me something a long time ago, and I never did. I'm pretty tall, so back then I was pretty tall. So my friend, Chase, my grandmother's name was Mama Rose. And my nickname was Fella. She said, I never forget this as long as I live. She said, Fella, sit down. He come to the door. I'm ready to go play basketball. So I was like, okay, Mom, what you need? She said, I want to tell you 2 things about life. And then I was, oh my God, here she goes. So she said, you can live life one of 2 ways. And she was looking, she held my arm because she knew I was ready to go. So she said, you can work hard. No, she said, you can play hard when you're young. That was my trigger. I'm trying to go play, Mama Rose. What are you talking about? And she stopped me. She said, and then you're going to work hard when you get old. That stopped me because I said, okay, play. Then she said, when I get old, I'm going to work hard. What does she mean by that? And then she flipped it. She said, you can work hard when you're young, and then you can play hard when you get old. Then she let me go. What I tell the kids that I see, what she meant by that is, when you're young, if you just play all the time and you don't get your schoolwork, especially now with all this AI coming out, you gonna work. You ain't gonna have no skills, you ain't gonna have nothing that you can do. What she meant by play, if you work hard when you're young, you make the money, you 401ks, whatnot. Play is what y'all see on Forbes and all that stuff. They're going to vacations and all that type of stuff. I close out.
Thank you. Your grandmother was a smart woman, for sure. I want to circle back to Mama Edie and Dr. McClellan because he referenced young folk. And so certainly the design of the technology can be alluring, but the information itself also has to be alluring. So how can history and storytelling together ensure that the voices of freedom seekers are preserved in a way that is meaningful to the younger generation? I'll start. Mama Edie, go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I want to give a specific, and I do this every now and then, but I can't do it enough. I want to give a specific thank you to Dr. McClellan for caring enough to initiate this project and to begin doing this kind of research so long ago. And interestingly enough, and it shouldn't be really shocking, when I have talked about this project to other people, there have been a few, not really many, that when they find out that this is a project that was started by a white man, by an older white man, they're like, I don't know. You know? And I get it. It gave me pause. And history has taught us to pause because we have had so many situations where we have been betrayed by people who presented themselves as allies and who said that they had good intentions, and they simply ended up taking advantage of us and of the situation. I've often said other people have always made more money on us than we have. And this is internationally. You know, you can go, I mean, our music is popular in Japan and places, it's popular in places where they don't care about the people. They like our music, they like our stuff, what we, present it, but they don't particularly care about the people. So my posture with that was that, listen, this was work that needed to be done. We didn't do it. Dr. McClellan did it. How you gonna be mad at him? So to support the project is important, and bringing it to the youth in ways like the storytelling that we're doing. So representing Ashe, our local storytellers, Ashe, the Chicago Association of Black Storytellers, as a partner in this project, gathering storytellers together. We've begun to place stories into the virtual space. So we've gotten started, and Edward has uploaded one of the stories that I've shared about Caroline Quarles.
She has a very good story, too.
Okay, thank you. And based on Dr. McClellan's research, got to give credit where it's due. And so in his book, Onward to Chicago, we've got over 70 individuals who actually made it through the Underground Railroad in this area, in the Chicago vicinity. So to be able to storyize, if you will, the research that Professor McClellan has provided to us, we can make it engaging. We can use language, and the fact that I'm a speech and language pathologist also helps me to develop the language so that it can reach everybody, so that it'll use vocabulary that everybody can understand, so that I can use mannerisms that might be a bit more engaging and to help bring people in. And so if we can use this technology to share the stories that way, then we've got some really good potential to share this information. And I think you're going to, should I do the inner office and intergenerational kinds of, did you have a specific, there's also efforts to pull older people and younger people together to have conversations. And so I'm part of that as well. And then there's a young man, with the support of an Illinois Arts Council grant that we received. There's a young man, Justice Pugh, bless him, who I'm mentoring as a developing storyteller. And to have the opportunity to engage in conversations that go beyond what are the influencers doing, and and all these kinds of things that oftentimes young people engage in, to have meaningful conversations with intergenerational circumstances has really been a gift as well, and I see great potential there.
Thank you. Dr. McClellan, anything to add to that?
Yes, and thank you for thank you for your comments. I think part of what we're looking at is there is this vital part of American history that nobody knows. And we want to use not only kind of historical ways to talk about that, but also stories, because we all respond very profoundly to stories. And so we are right now, the four of us are deeply involved in 3 particular stories out of the 70 that we've identified in the Cook County region. And looking at the brutality of slavery as part of our common history, and then beginning to see the varieties of ways in which human beings that were enslaved responded to that. And what we have is a cycle of stories about one of those ways that people responded, and people that by any means necessary left their enslavement and headed for freedom. These are remarkable stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things, stories of resistance and resilience and courage and compassion, and they are really tremendous stories to tell. And it's really important that we understand these kind of stories. Remember, history doesn't repeat itself, but history rhymes. We look at that story of the Underground Railroad and what freedom thinkers went through, and then there is this very powerful human question. Let's say that you think what the government is doing is illegal. And there are some people who are being grabbed off the streets and thrown into jail. Now, that is exactly what was happening in Cook County and across the country in the 1830s and 40s and 50s. Human beings that for no other reason than the fact that they were people of African descent, they were being hauled off to jail and being imprisoned and sent back into slavery and all kinds of horrendous things. And there is this great human question. If you had been around in 1850 and a family of color shows up on your doorstep and they asked for some simple help. Can we sleep in your barn? Do you have some food? Can you give us directions? And you know that if you respond, you are breaking the law. What do? And we have remarkable stories of white families and black families that decided they would break the law to help people that were endangered.
Yeah.
And just jump to today. And if you're sitting in your house and there are ICE agents in the neighborhood and somebody knocks on your door and you can tell by their desperation that these may be illegal immigrants, what then do you do? What do we do? Are we willing to say, we will break the law to shelter these folks? It is the same phenomenon. And I think one of the reasons why our stories are so important is because it is getting at that fundamental human question. When people are in desperate shape as human beings and they've got their kids with them, how do we respond? And I think these stories help us to understand that some people find the means to say, yeah, I'll break the law. I'll stand against the federal edicts because this is the human thing to do. And I think that stories enable us to see these human dynamics.
Thank you, Dr. McClellan, for making that reference. I don't know about y'all, but that gave me some chills and a bit of a heart check around the parallels. I, too, am involved in a research project where I am documenting the Great Migration. And I often say in that work that escaping from slavery was migration because they were moving towards freedom, towards better opportunity. And there were folks along the way that helped people get to where they were going in the Great Migration when they were migrating from the South, and similarly in the Underground Railroad. Similarly, they were helping folks get to freedom. And again, pointing out, and I think we can't say this enough, that certainly there were allies, but a lot of the freedom seekers were freedom seekers themselves who either had gotten free, knew someone that was free, and were part of the design of the complexity of how to get free from an enslaved set of circumstances. I want to talk about freedom and the modern form of freedom through digital literacy. So this is for Edward and Rodney. In what ways is digital literacy today a modern form of freedom for communities that have historically been excluded from access to technology? I'll start with Edward.
Yeah, thank you. I'm ready for that.
Yeah, great question.
Yeah. One thing, as far as, I'm sure you all have heard of the digital divide. You know, and we do a lot of work with like junior achievement, and I never forget, I went to I speak at schools. I went to one school, I'm not gonna say their name. They had more powerful, the kids were like 7, they had more powerful laptops than I did. I was like, whoa, you got that? Then you go into some of the other areas and they got 6-year-old Chromebooks when they were first invented. You know, so you have to deal with that. But the biggest thing is, that's where everything is headed, you know, as far as AI and all the digital technologies. And as far as the VR, the goggles, if you're not in that space, you don't understand it. Microsoft has shut down their VR goggles things because they're heavy. Some people have problems with them. So you don't see a lot of that now. Everything is now talking about AI. So what we're doing, it has 2 purposes. not only to explain to the youth their history and what they should realize, what people had to go through to get to them, so maybe they will work hard, but also we can train them in the same technology. How do you work within this AI space? You can't just ignore it because it's getting better. And one thing I always tell the youth, when I speak with junior achievement, I ask them three things. I say, have you heard of AI? And all of them say, yeah. Do you know what it is? They say, yeah. Do you think it's going to replace your job? They say, yeah. I get 3 on all of that. And I say, you have to go from a doer of something to a user. You can't just do something. AI will replace you. So you have to learn how to use it, and you be better than that next person because you've used AI to be more efficient to do that. And there's tons of opportunities in that if you do that.
So I will piggyback off of that and talk about how learning through technology creates opportunity, not only for our youth, but also for those who are aspiring for college and beyond. You're now able to show that you have engineering skills without going to school and doing the 4-year debt accumulation of that. You can utilize technology right now, which reduces the amount of costs that it would take to go through a traditional educational process. So already you're creating efficiencies from that, all right? Because we are community development, my organization, we're all about attempting to reach not only the youth that we obviously are connected with, but also those developing their own careers, as well as the ones that we are talking about mid-career, and seniors as well. Being able to understand technology, how to utilize and be part of that space, it allows, again, for the freedom, I think, to create and also to potentially earn a living, because you are now part of this society that now is transitioning from a, again, traditional learning environment to one that is more forward-thinking and is also utilizing the tools that we have in place to really accelerate their opportunity to learn. I just saw a young man. He's 9 years old, and he is attending college. And there was something that was found out in him early that allowed him to move in that space of learning, and he utilized technology to help him matriculate quickly through elementary, high school, and now he's in college and aspiring to be a doctor. And you can only do that through the use of today's tools. And I think that if we make it available, continue to make it available, we're on to a very positive space, God willing, to allow for future folks to, again, learn and grow from this. So.
Agree 100%. The work that we do in digital equity, sometimes folks get caught up in that phrasing, not understanding what digital equity means, but it really does mean equitable access, equitable opportunity, ensuring that everyone has the access to the internet, to the tools, that they have the confidence or folks or access to folks to help them build the confidence, the skills that they need to do whatever it is they need to do, whether it's get a job, whether it's talk to your grandbabies on FaceTime, whatever it is that you need to do to make your life full and whole, we want that for you in the digital equity space. So just in case y'all were wondering what that means for you. And there's lots of intersection around digital equity. I think sometimes people see that it involves technology, and then they say, oh, that ain't for me. Or they say automatically, oh, I'm not good at technology. Well, technology is here to stay. Just letting y'all know. And we are all part of the digital society, how we do banking, how we make doctor's appointments. And certainly there's access there, equity there, if you're able to do that. But there are lots of folks who don't have that opportunity, and we seek to help to address those gaps. So it's been wonderful chatting with you. So let's talk about the vision for the future. What partnerships or resources are most needed to sustain this project? We did have a demo of the project, but I don't want to test the technology, guys. So we're just going to keep talking, and we'll share that link out so that y'all can see the demo of the virtual museum that they have built together. But what partnerships or resources are needed to sustain and this work, to expand this work, to grow this work? Anyone, feel free to answer.
I'll jump in. Well, one thing about technology, it has costs. But the main thing is it has heavy benefits. So the cost to benefit ratio is over the roof. So if you're trying to reach that target audience, you got to reach them on the screens, because that's where they're at. Like if a kid can get on the screen and use a game-based program and learn about AI, learn about going to college, and learn about a trade school, because trade schools their stock is up a lot, because you can't replace a wrench with AI. So all of those are up. So again, developing this has heavy benefits, and then working with organizations like ROC ED, you get the content, you get technology and content. So you start putting in content, not only give them their history, but give them their future.
Well said.
Anyone else?
I think another part of the future we've got to be looking at very seriously is that, guess what? History is under attack in this country.
Exactly.
And we have to, for the future, we have got to be making sure that we're developing, if you will, the safe and accurate sources that I think years ago, it used to be, well, we'll get a historian to talk about something, and he'd tell the truth. Today, you ask someone to tell the truth, may not tell the truth.
Right.
And particularly when we're talking about Black history, people don't want to tell the truth. And so we've got to, for the future, develop a series of mechanisms, relationships, collaborations, so that we know that we are getting the honest stuff. We're getting the true stories. We're fulfilling our understanding of history rather than chopping it up. And I think, unfortunately, that has become a major futures discussion.
And right quick, I don't know what the quote is, but it's something like, if you don't know your past, you will perish. I know it ain't right, but that's what.
Yep.
That's kind of what you're talking about. You
That's
need
right.
to always know your past and what people had to go through in order for you to move forward in the future. You had that much more determination to do that.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I think that connecting with other organizations that are also engaged in history, in retaining history and documenting it, like the history makers. So we had connected with, so I'm part of the history makers. And so because they already have a digital archive, for us to support each other's efforts in terms of getting their archives also into the schools would be a wonderful thing. And that's why I was saying that the storytelling, if we insist on telling these stories and getting them told, then we won't be erased. It's not
Yep.
just the history is under attack. The attack is that they were trying to erase us,
Yeah.
and it has been happening, ever since, and what have you. And one of the problems has been the way in which Black people have been presented. So, for example, I remember when I was a child growing up, now I made the statement earlier on that if you don't have a healthy sense of identity, then you don't really see yourself as being worthy of anything good happening to you. Or you figure that's just your lot. You're supposed to live in such and such neighborhood, or you're supposed to have this and that. And my first introduction to Africa was Tarzan movies. Who wants to connect with that?
Yeah.
You know, if the people in the village had a problem, they didn't show the elders coming together to discuss how they were going to deal with the problem. They were waiting for a little white boy swinging through the trees, beating on his chest to come to save the day. Who wants to claim a relationship to Africa if that's all you know about Africa? So you had people growing up saying, I ain't no African, you know, don't want to look like an African and those kinds of things. So the piece of identity is something that we can also assist through storytelling. I've written stories that celebrate the natural beauty of Black people of all complexions. There are songs that we can do. We can put those kinds of stories into technology so that we can show people the beauty and show them the power and the strength that they have inside. If we can present that through technology and insist that those stories continue to be told, if we resist this effort to be erased, our neighborhoods, I had a lot of people who lived along what is now Dan Ryan Expressway. And this so-called gentrification is happening across the country where Black communities are being wiped out. Either they're being bombed like Tulsa and so many others, or they're being burned, or they've got gentrification. You know, you got people building a McDonald's on top of a historical marker. Come on, what's up with that? You know, so insisting that the stories continue to be told, gathering together, partnering with other organizations who are doing the same thing, pooling our resources, and then translating that into a technological sharing, and especially keeping in mind something that I care a lot about, access to people with disabilities. So through our virtual museum, you don't need to be able to walk. All you need to be able to do is, you know, operate your mouse.
Right. Get you some digital skills.
Get you some digital skills, that's right.
Rodney.
This is a public asset. This is a public asset. So a public asset, when you have an asset, you require investment. So that investment, through that partnership, comes from philanthropic organizations as well as governmental organizations. Thank you, Cook County. The impact grant has allowed for us to jumpstart this particular project. But in order for this to really grow, we're going to need that type of partnership that will allow us to expand upon the technology that Edward is building out so that we can make this a fulsome project. Again, this has an economic development component to it. Is that Sochi over there? All right, so with that, I'll give an example of the Harriet Tubman Byway. Has anyone ever heard of that?
Yes.
Harriet Tubman Byway, you've heard of it because
Yes,
you've
I've
been on it.
been on it.
120-mile route between Eastern Shore, Maryland, up through Pennsylvania. We've got a similar opportunity here in Illinois. Chicago to Detroit, the path that leads to freedom. And we ultimately hope that we can, through legislation that was just created, perform or create a similar type of route that will lead for this, or lead to this history being realized through travel and tourism. Again, the technology is a travel tourism component. It brings folks to Illinois, both residents and folks that are outside of the state. It can serve as an engine for Cook County and beyond. So again, creating those necessary partnerships to help launch, and again, our technology is sort of the starting point for all of these types of activities. I think we will ultimately get to that preferred destination, God willing.
Yeah.
One thing that, everything that's been talked about is what? The experience. For example, let's say our next version of the program, if we get the funding, we can actually put a digital, I'm sure you all heard the term digital twin. You hear it a lot in architecture where you do a digital twin of a building before they build it. You could do the same thing with environments. So with the museum, to the next to the museum, we actually have the grass and the trees. We could do the Ton Farm in 3D, and you could actually experience walking through there. And, I mean, we could do a lot. If you're seen any of your kids' video games, if they can do all of that in the video games, blow up stuff and everything, why can't we use some of that for, knowledge and doing good? That all of that capability is out there. It's out there, but it's not being used properly to influence our children. And like those 3 boys told me, they say if you could show us that, because sometimes they get tired of it, and then they want to see something that's gonna benefit them.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time today. We're going to take a few questions if folks have those before we.
Just one real
Come on,
quick-
Mama Edie.
Real quick thing, because I want to piggyback on what you were saying about the capacity to take people into the virtual space with the grass and what have you. I wanted to mention the performance, I called it an experiential immersive performance that I did at Sandridge Nature
Yes.
Center.
Yes.
Where I guided the guests through the woods. Like I was one of the people who had escaped Caroline Quarles, and we had drummers at the other end that the guests didn't know about. And as I'm telling them about the situation and I'm getting information about them, I told the drummers that at a certain time, as we moved back to where we were going to start, I wanted them to drum. And so the story was that, so I told the guests, I heard that there are some slave catchers right there at the edge of the border of Canada, but there's some drummers there too. And so they have people who will serve as lookouts. And if we hear the drums going, you all have to run. And they looked at me like, is she serious? And so we're going along, going through this thick woods. And then all of a sudden, they heard the drums playing. And they looked at me like, what should we do? And I said, run! And everybody starts taking off through the woods, and we're running, and then we get back to behind the Welcome Center. It's like, we're in Canada, we're free. Everybody was like, yay! So that's the kind, and we did video record that, but it's the kind of experience that we can also do with Edwards technology, where we can tell a story and take them through the woods, and so they don't have to be a Sandridge. But they can take the story and put it into that technology and have that experience as well, so.
Thank you, Mama
Thank you for
Edie.
that.
No worries. Any questions from anyone here or online?
Okay, now let me do you like I do the kids at JA. Somebody ask a question. There we go.
I read somewhere that freedom seekers also went south, so there's a lot of folks that ended up going to like Mexico or like even like South America. So I just wanted to know like if that's also like part of the storytelling process or
Across the country, if I may.
Yeah.
Across the country, there are a lot of people doing work, and it's very clear that a huge number of people escaping their enslavement, particularly from Texas and Louisiana, went into Mexico. There are also some wonderful stories about freedom seekers going into the West and living with indigenous people. We have a really great story from the early days of Illinois of a freedom seeker that comes up and lives with the Potawatomi for years. And that, and so there are, in all those directions, people going to the Caribbean. There were even folks that commandeered ships and sailed them up the East Coast to get to New England and freedom there. And so there is, across the country, this very, very rich set of activities going on. There are some pretty good national communication networks. The National Park Service sponsors a thing called the Network to Freedom, which connects us all over the country. And by the way, we are just, Rodney alluded to it, we are just now, the governor signed the legislation to create the Illinois Freedom Trails Commission, and we're just now taking steps to kind of link everybody together around the state. But it is a Cook County story, it is an Illinois story, it is an American story, and it's an international story.
And if I can add to that, because of digitization and the technology
Yes.
that we're into these days, more of us have been able to learn that some of the descendants of enslaved people who ended up in places like Mexico, they had been there for so long that they're all speaking Spanish, of course, and but they eventually came to a point where they wanted to recognize and embrace their Africanness, and so they've begun to learn some of the same dances that we African Americans have learned, and some of the same songs, and to have celebrations so honoring their Africanness as, and they've also been treated by other people, by the what do they call it, the majority, the majority population, pretty much the same way that we are here, and pretty much the way people of color around the world have been treated. They've been ostracized, given second class, third class citizenship, and little to no consideration in that kind of thing. So again, that matter of identity, they're now identifying the wholeness of who they are, and they're insisting that they be seen, and that they be acknowledged, and that their freedom and that their rights be acknowledged and respected as well. So thank you for your question.
Thank you.
I also found out that there were Confederates that found their way to Mexico as well.
Yes,
They kind of followed the path and set up shop there, so. Yeah.
And the
History.
National Museum, the Mexican National Museum also has done, some years ago, we had a celebration there on the African presence in Mexico. That was really quite wonderful, and people have built upon that as well. So, thank you.
Any other questions?
I have a question from the chat.
Okay.
Awesome. So great repository of knowledge. Thank you. What would you like today's listeners to do in terms of picking up the baton and ensuring this critical history is not erased by the federal government?
Well, that's a good question. Allow for this conversation to activate each and every one of us in your own particular way. Again, using the term freedom. Feel free and be empowered to do your part in ensuring that the things that are going on today, you have a direct ability to dissuade, ultimately, the direction, just by being active. And again, that's civic engagement. Engage. Don't sit back. Don't watch. Don't say, oh, it's happening to them. Get active wherever you are, in your communities, in your schools. Just be a part of it. And if you can do that, I think individually we can start creating a collective that will, again, push back some of the things that we're seeing today.
And just right quick, to piggyback off of that, as we start and others start to release content and digital tools, make sure you introduce your children and everyone's children, because if they don't know us out there, they're not going to go to it. And we have to reach our youth, because they're coming before us. So as long as we get all of this messaging out that we're doing, I think that's a good push towards the right direction.
And have conversations with people who you wouldn't normally have conversations with. Have conversations with people of other cultures. Don't talk about what's on TV. Talk about what's in your heart. Talk about your joys. Talk about your aspirations. Talk about how you're going to get there. Talk about the things that you tried to do and didn't quite make it, but what you learned from the effort and what you're going to do now. I just did a presentation in Milwaukee. They had a grand opening for their Martin Luther King Library. Phenomenal facility, but there was a gentleman, an older white gentleman who was there, stayed through the entire program, and he came to me later. He said, Mama Edie, I so much appreciated your presentation. He said, I live in a town that hardly has any black people. He said, I don't know any black people. And I have never, this is what he said, I have never put myself in a space where there would be a lot of black people. I've never done that before today. And he said, I have to tell you that I appreciate so much what I learned and what your expressions of your sentiments and your reflections and what have you. You talked about the March with Dr. King at 15 years old and that kind of thing. You learn all kind of fascinating things, and we can learn cross-culturally from the struggles. Everybody's had some kind of struggles, but our
Yeah.
struggles are not the same.
For sure.
You know, a lot of people draw comparisons between Jewish people and black people. There's a lot of comparison there, but it's not the same. At the end of the day, a Jewish person, in most cases, still looks like a white person walking down the street. They're not going to get the same response that I'll get. And so talk to people. Allow yourself, be comfortable enough, be confident enough in your own identity to know that you could sit with somebody who's not like you
Absolutely.
and have a conversation.
Absolutely. We are at time. I just want to thank our esteemed participants. Thank you, Rodney. Thank you, Dr. McClellan. Thank you, Mama Edie. Thank you, Edward, for sharing your stories and talking about our project. This is going to be video recorded and put together in a very lovely format with all of the videos that y'all did not get to see, as well as some references. This video can be part of your opportunity of action. Share the video on your networks. Play it with your family so that folks can learn more. This is an opportunity of learning and growth through sharing and sharing via stories. So thank you. This was Digital Bridges to Freedom.
Thank you.
And then you would get to the character screen. And we can change these characters around, any type of character that we would want. And there's a lot of things we can do in the character area. So I'm going to select this character here. So here's the character that I just selected. So now I can actually use your cursor here to walk through this particular area. So I'm going to go to the Media Center first. So here, these are all of the images that are, then this is a video that plays. So we can have a different video.
The Little Calumet River and Riverdale Crossing. When Chicago was first...
So of course that could be a video for this area. So these are all the images that were taken at some of the tours. So you're able to walk around and see them. And again, this is just version 1.0 of the demo. So we can have videos in here. We can have a number of different areas inside of this space. This character can answer a lot of questions about the Underground Railroad. So I'll ask a couple more. Tell me about the Underground Railroad.
The Underground Railroad wasn't a literal railroad, but a network of secret routes and safe houses used by enslaved African Americans to escape to freedom in the North and Canada. Brave individuals, known as conductors, risked their lives to guide freedom seekers, often facing immense danger. It represents a powerful testament to the resilience and courage of those seeking liberation.